Speaking about the tower which Yeats made his home, he wrote to a friend called T. Sturge Moore, "I like to think of that building as a permanent symbol of my work, plainly visible to the passer-by." And he gave the title, The Tower, to one of the collections of his poem. As if not satisfied with one collection, he gave the title, The Winding Stair, to a subsequent collection of his poems published in 1933, first in 1929 and then in 1933. And he called this subsequent collection The Winding Stair. Today we are going to read a poem called The Tower, published for the first time in 1927 in the New Republic and the Criterion, and later in 1928 in the collection called The Tower. The Tower, like Meditations in Time of Civil War and 1919, is a sequence of poems, is a collection of poems. And here once again, as in 1919, and unlike Meditations in Time of Civil War, he gives us no title for each section that makes his poem called The Tower. The first section is one long passage, verse paragraph of 16 lines, rhyming AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GH, GH. The rhyme scheme suggests stateliness, because Yeats is speaking like an old man. Think of Yeats in his early 60s, and then you can appreciate his poetry, the poetry of The Tower, better. "What shall I do with this absurdity, O heart, O troubled heart, this caricature, decrepit age that has been tied to me as to a dog's tail?" He is speaking about the decrepitude that he is finding in himself. His grey hair, his wizened face, his failing eyesight, his weakening teeth, a body not as agile as when he was a young man. That is what he is complaining about. This old age is tied to him like as to a dog's tail. If you tie something to a dog's tail, the dog feels very uneasy. That is the image that he has for the old age that has come to him. "What shall I do with this absurdity, O heart, O troubled heart, this caricature, decrepit age that has been tied to me as to a dog's tail? Never had I more excited, passionate, fantastical imagination, nor an ear and eye that more expected the impossible." What is the quality of youth? Youth expects the impossible. Youth has the energy to do whatever he or she wants to do. In old age, you are always, as it were, impeded by your body. Your own body is the impediment to your desires. And he says, "Never had I more excited, passionate, fantastical imagination, nor an ear and eye that more expected the impossible. No, not in boyhood, when with rod and fly, or the humbler worm, I climbed Ben Bulben's back." He is describing his early experience in Sligo. Ben Bulben is the mountain in Sligo, and when he climbed that Ben Bulben, or he went for fishing in the lake there with the humbler worm, with the rod and fly, in order to fish in the waters in the Ben Bulben, he is describing that. He says that his imagination is much more powerful. He suffers much more excitement than he felt as a child or as a young man, and had the livelong summer day to spend, it seems that I must bid the muse go back, choose Plato and Plotinus for a friend, until imagination, ear and eye can be content with argument and deal in abstract things, or be derided by a sort of battered kettle at the heel. So old age is like a battered kettle at the heel. What does he mean by say, it seems that I must bid the muse go back? Muse is the goddess of creativity. The poetic muse, we talk about the poetic muse. The art comes from inspiration. And he says, what would I do with this inspiration now that I am old, now that I cannot translate my inspiration into action, into something positive, something concrete? I must bid the muse go back, choose Plato and Plotinus for a friend. He says Plato and Plotinus were both philosophers who supported abstract thoughts. They did not favor creativity because they thought that man should be rational. Plato thought that man should be rational. And poetry always impels us to be mad. You cannot have, in Phaedrus he talks about poetry as the activity of a madman. There is a certain kind of madness that must descend upon a poet. And he is talking about Plotinus. Plotinus was born in Egypt, and around 244 AD he went to live in Rome and he settled there. He was a great mystic philosopher. He has been called a Neoplatonist philosopher. His student Porphyry has written a biography of him, and he was the one who compiled his works, his writings, into a whole piece which he called Enneads. Yeats says that what should he do now that he is old? He says he must bid the muse go back, choose Plato and Plotinus for a friend, until imagination, ear and eye can be content with argument and deal in abstract things, or be derided by a sort of battered kettle at the heel. Because the best that an old man can do is to think about abstract things, because that does not require bodily functions, that does not require bodily activity. And this is how the first section of the poem ends, asking the muses to go away from him and inviting Plato and Plotinus to be his friends, to be the mates of his mind. But Yeats is not such a simple poet. He is in the habit of taking somersaults. And so, in the next section, he calls a convocation of all the dead souls, or all the non-living human beings. Let us read who are those people whom he calls. I space upon the battlements and stare. He is talking about the tower. I pace upon the battlements and stare on the foundations of a house. This house is the tower which you see behind me. I pace upon the battlements and stare on the foundations of a house, or where tree like a sooty finger starts from the earth and send imagination forth under the day's declining beam, and call images and memories from ruin or from ancient trees. For I would like a question. I would ask a question of them all. Notice this convocation of non-living things, a convocation of the past. Beyond that ridge lived Mrs. French, and once when every single candlestick or scones lit up the dark mahogany and the wine, a serving man that did divine that most respected lady's every wish, ran and with the garden shears clipped an insolent farmer's ears, and brought them in a little covered dish. This Mrs. French is a grandee, is a very rich lady. And how does Yeats's poetry suggest that? Beyond that ridge lived Mrs. French. He is looking at a ridge from the tower, his house. And once when every single candlestick or scones lit up the dark mahogany and the wine, the dark mahogany furniture, the scones, the silver candlestick, and the wine all suggest affluence. And this is how Yeats succeeds in conjuring up the image of prosperity. A serving man that could divine that most respected lady's every wish. What did this serving man do? He discovered that his lady was unhappy with somebody. So he went out with the garden shears, clipped his ears, and brought them in a little covered dish before his lady. Ran and with the garden shears clipped an insolent farmer's ears, and brought them in a little covered dish. In one stanza, he portrays the affluence, the Anglo-Irish affluence of his society. Some few remembered still when I was young, a patient girl commended by a song, who'd lived somewhere upon that rocky place, and praised the color of her face, and had the greater joy in praising her, remembering that if walked she there, farmers jostled at the fair, or so great a glory did the song confer. Some few remembered still when I was young, a patient girl commended by a song, who'd lived somewhere upon that rocky place, and praised the color of her face, and had the greater joy in praising her, remembering that if walked she there, farmers jostled at the fair, so great a glory did the song confer. He is praising, notice, the glory to the song of Anthony Raftery. That such was the song that, listening to this song, the farmers jostled one another in order to see this lady Mary Hines. And certain men, being maddened by those rhymes, or else by toasting her a score of times, rose from the table and declared it right to test their fancy by their sight, but they mistook the brightness of the moon for the prosaic light of day. Music had driven their wits away, and one was drowned in the great bog of Clune. This again is a true story that Yeats is narrating. And certain men, being maddened by those rhymes, or else by toasting her a score of times, rose from the table and declared it right to test their fancy by their sight, but they mistook the brightness of the moon for the prosaic light of day. Music had driven their wits away, music had driven their wits astray, and one was drowned in the great bog of Clune. This man who went out to have a look at Mary Hines got caught in Clune bog, Daldal, and there he lost his life. Strange. But the man who made the song was blind. Now, he says, this was strange, that a man in his senses could have mistook the brightness of the moon for sunlight and set out to have a look at Mary Hines, and did not care for the path on which he was walking, getting caught in the Clune bog and losing his life in order to see beauty. Strange. And Yeats goes on to talk about something still more strange. But the man who made the song was blind. Yet now I have considered it, I find that nothing strange. The tragedy began with Homer, that was a blind man, and heaven has all living hearts betrayed. O may the moon and sunlight seem one inextricable beam, for if I triumph, I must make men mad. Yeats is thinking of himself as a successor of Raftery, as a successor of Homer. Writing poetry is a sedentary trade. One has to toil unseen by the world. Strange, but the man who made the song was blind, yet now I have considered it. I find that nothing strange. The tragedy began with Homer, that was a blind man, and Helen has all living hearts betrayed. Here there is a unique poignancy in what Yeats is saying. Helen has all living hearts betrayed. When he is writing Helen, he is thinking of Maud Gonne, the woman who betrayed his heart. Oh, may the moon and sunlight seem one inextricable beam, for if I triumph, I must make men mad. Yeats wants the same power in his poetry that he found in Anthony Raftery and Homer before him. If I triumph, I must make men mad. And I myself created Hanrahan. Having talked about Mary Hines and Mrs. French, and before that of Plato and Plotinus, he now talks about Hanrahan. Hanrahan was not a living character. You can find his story of Hanrahan in his uncollected prose, which were published after his death. And I myself created Hanrahan and drove him drunk or sober through the dawn from somewhere in the neighboring cottages. Caught by an old man's juggleries, he stumbled, tumbled, fumbled to and fro, and had but broken knees for hire and horrible splendor of desire. I thought it all out 20 years ago. He wrote about Hanrahan 20 years ago in a story. Who was this Hanrahan? Hanrahan was also in love with a woman, a lady called Ecgtheow. Ecgtheow was a queen. He approached a palace at night. From outside it was night, so it was dark. When he entered, it was like daylight. And he looked at a lady, a queen, sitting in the middle of a hall, served by serving men, who was extremely beautiful. And I myself created Hanrahan and drove him drunk or sober through the dawn from somewhere in the neighboring cottages, caught by an old man's juggleries. He stumbled, tumbled, fumbled to and fro, and had that but broken knees for hire, and horrible splendor of desire. I thought it all out 20 years ago. He was also acting like that man who set out to see Mary Hines with his own two eyes, and in the process lost his life in the Clune bog. Here Yeats's creation was Hanrahan. He was also mad in love, as Yeats himself was in his life. Good fellows shuffled cards in an old bawn, and when their ancient ruffian's turn was on, he so bewitched the cards under his thumb that all but the one card became a pack of hounds and not a pack of cards, and that he changed into a hare. Hanrahan rose in frenzied air and followed up those baying creatures towards. Here is this man whose imagination is what you can now see him. He in the image of the baying dogs, the baying hounds. Good fellows shuffle cards in an old bawn. Now, what happened? It almost reads like magic realism. You feel you were reading a novel by Marquez. Good fellows shuffle cards in an old bawn, and when that ancient ruffian's turn was on, he so bewitched the cards under his thumb that all but the one card became a pack of hounds and not a pack of cards, and that he changed into a hare. He had 52 cards in his hand. He was shuffling them. He was playing cards. A few friends were sitting together and playing cards, and Hanrahan got the 52 cards in his hand, and he converted 51 of them into hounds. One of the cards which remained was converted into a hare, and he left them all to fly. Hanrahan rose in frenzy there, and then he rose in frenzy and followed them up. And while following them, he reached a palace at night. And when he entered that lonely palace, he discovered XJ. XJ was extremely beautiful, indescribably beautiful, but she would not respond to his love. Oh, towards I have forgotten what. Notice the last line he says. Hanrahan rose in frenzy there and followed up those baying creatures towards. And then Yeats is portraying, as it were, a tired, decrepit old man. Oh, towards I have forgotten what. Enough of Hanrahan. His mind cannot wait to think about one thing. I must recall a man that neither love nor music nor an enemy's clipped ear could he was so harried cheer, a figure that has grown so fabulous, there's not a neighbor left to say, when he finished his dog's day, an ancient bankrupt master of this house. Having talked about living and imaginary creatures, Yeats now turns to an actual occupant of the tower, somebody who had lived long before him. Oh, towards I have forgotten what. Enough. I must recall a man that neither love nor music nor an enemy's clipped ear could he was so harried cheer, a figure that has grown so fabulous, there's not a neighbor left to say, when he finished his dog's day, an ancient bankrupt master of this house. He is talking about the tower. It is this house which he is talking about, an owner of this house. He became so poor, the occupant of this house became so poor that he lost all interest in life. Nobody around him knew who he was, what he did, how he lived, and how he died. Oh, towards I have forgotten what. Enough. I must recall a man that neither love nor music nor an enemy's clipped ear. So what he is thinking about? He is thinking about all those people about whom he has talked. The music that led the farmers to jostle in the fair for Mary Hines. The beauty of and the pride and the power and the pelf and the prestige of one Mrs. French. He is thinking of the lechery of Hanrahan, his own creation. And now he recalls a poor owner of this house in which he lives now. I must recall a man that neither love nor music nor an enemy's clipped ear. An enemy's clipped ear is reference to Mrs. French. Could he was so harried cheer, a figure that has grown so fabulous, there's not a neighbor left to say, when he finished his dog's day, an ancient bankrupt master of this house. Before that ruin came, for centuries, rough men-at-arms, cross-gartered to the knees, or shod in iron, climbed the narrow stairs, and certain men-at-arms there were, whose images in the great memory stored, come with loud cry and panting breast, to break upon a sleeper's rest, while their great wooden dice beat on the board. Remember, Yeats, the title of this poem is The Tower. So all his images circle around this tower. The convocation that he has called of images all appear before the tower, as it were. Now he is thinking about some of the occupants who lived even before this man who had been harried so badly. Before that ruin came, for centuries rough men at arms, cross-gartered to the knees or shod in iron, climbed the narrow stairs. Yeats has recorded that ghosts lived in that house, in this tower, and he had seen some of these men playing dice at the table in his bedroom. Before that ruin came, for centuries rough men at arms, cross-gartered to the knees or shod in iron, climbed the narrow stairs, and certain men at arms there were, whose images in the great memory stored, come with loud cry and panting breast, to break upon a sleeper's rest, while their great wooden dice beat on the board. Yeats is describing here his ghostly, his supernatural experience of these men, these dead ancestors, the ghosts of these dead ancestors playing dice on the table in his bedroom. Let's stop here and we will continue the discussion in the next lecture. Thank you.